The kid room, she sits alone, pen and paper, her thoughts unknown, writing to the girl she'll someday be, a future filled with dreams she's yet to see. Letters to tomorrow, stories from today, heartfelt words to guide her on her way. Through the highs and lows, she'll find her light in the letters to tomorrow. She'll find her flight. Oh, dreams and hopes, she lays them bare in the pages. She confides her care. First love lost in tears she shed, heartbreak's lessons in ink are read. Letters to tomorrow, stories from today, heartfelt words to guide her on her way. Through the highs and lows, she'll find her light in the letters to tomorrow. She'll find her fight. Friendships, warmth, and family ties, big decisions, fears she hides, milestones past, she writes them down, a journey told in word profound. Now she writes the final page. Before the next, she turns the stage. With the letters in her hand, she sees her growth, she understands. Letters to tomorrow, stories from today, heartfelt words to guide her on her way. Through the highs and lows, she'll find her light in the letters to tomorrow. She'll find her fight, reflecting on the girl she was and the woman she'll become. Because in the letters to tomorrow, she finds her strength, a legacy of love at length. Letters to tomorrow, stories from today, heartfelt words to guide her on her way. Through the highs and lows, she'll find her light in the letters to tomorrow. She'll find her fight in the letters to tomorrow. She'll find her fight. The kid room, she sits alone, pen and paper, her thoughts unknown, writing to the girl she'll someday be.
The old oil lamp cast a warm glow across the wooden table. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she dipped her pen in ink. The blank paper before her seemed to stretch endlessly. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was it, the first letter to her future self.
Outside, the wind whistled through the prairie grass. It was a sound I knew well. I'd grown up with it here on the family ranch. Now, at 16, I felt like I was on the edge of something big, something new. The future loomed ahead, exciting and scary all at once.
Clara's pen scratched across the paper.
Dear future me, I wrote. The words came slowly at first, then faster. I wrote about my hopes and dreams, about the ranch and the horses I loved, about the big, wide world out there waiting for me.
As she wrote, Clara felt a spark of excitement in her chest. By the time she finished, the lamp had burned low. Clara folded the letter carefully and tucked it into an old shoebox.
There, I whispered to myself. That's the first one.
She didn't know then how many more letters would join it, or how they would shape her life in the years to come. Clara's second letter was full of dreams. She wrote it sitting on her favorite hill. The summer sun warmed her back. Below, the ranch spread out like a patchwork quilt. Horses grazed in the meadow. Cattle lowed in the distance. This was home.
But I dreamed of more. I wrote about running my own ranch someday. It would be bigger than my parents'. With more horses and cattle, I'd have the finest stallions in the county. People would come from miles around to see them.
Clara's pen flew across the page as she described every detail. But it wasn't just about the animals.
I wrote about the life I imagined, the early mornings and long days, the satisfaction of hard work, the joy of seeing things grow. I wanted to prove myself, to show that a girl could run a ranch just as well as any man.
As the sun began to set, Clara finished her letter. She read it over, smiling to herself. It was a big dream, maybe too big, but as she looked out over the ranch, Clara felt sure she could do it. Someday, somehow, she'd make it happen. The third letter was harder to write. Clara's hand shook as she put pen to paper. Tears blurred her vision. She'd just had her heart broken for the first time. It hurt more than she ever thought possible.
His name was Tom. He worked on a neighboring ranch. I had thought he was the one. We'd spent the summer riding horses together, talking about our dreams. I'd even imagined marrying him someday. But then he left, gone off to the city without even saying goodbye.
Clara poured her heartache onto the page.
I wrote about the emptiness I felt, the way the ranch suddenly seemed too quiet, too lonely. I wondered if I'd ever feel whole again, if I'd ever trust anyone with my heart again.
But as she wrote, something changed. Clara found herself writing about hope, too.
I wrote about how I was stronger than this heartbreak, how I'd learn from it and move on.
By the time she finished the letter, her tears had dried. She felt a little braver, a little more ready to face tomorrow. The one person who truly understood her, Emma, was the sister Clara never had. They'd been best friends since childhood. Clara's fourth letter was all about Emma.
Emma didn't try to fix things, she just listened. That meant more to me than I could say. It reminded me that some bonds were unbreakable. How she showed up with cookies and a shoulder to cry on. I described how Emma stood by me after Tom left. The secrets we kept, the laughter we shared. I wrote about our adventures together.
Clara wrote about their shared dreams too.
But we both wanted to make a difference, to leave our mark on the world. We promised to support each other no matter what. I wanted to run a ranch. Emma wanted to be a teacher.
As she finished the letter, Clara felt grateful for Emma's friendship, for the way it had shaped her.
I knew that whatever the future held, Emma would be there, through thick and thin, come rain or shine.
That thought made Clara feel rich beyond measure. The fifth letter was a tribute to Clara's family. She wrote it after a long day of branding cattle. Her muscles ached, her clothes were dusty, but her heart was full.
I'd worked alongside my parents and brothers all day. It reminded me of how lucky I was.
Clara described her father's quiet strength, the way he could calm a spooked horse with just a touch, and how he taught her to read the land and the sky.
I wrote about my mother's endless patience, the way she kept the family going through good times and bad.
Her brothers got a mention too, the teasing and the fighting, but also the fierce protectiveness, the way they always had her back.
I wrote about the lessons I'd learned from each of them, about hard work and honesty, about facing your fears and standing up for what's right.
As she finished the letter, Clara felt a deep sense of belonging. Her family wasn't perfect. They had their arguments and misunderstandings, but they were hers. They'd shaped her into who she was, and she wouldn't have it any other way. Clara's sixth letter was written in a moment of doubt. She sat at her desk, college brochures spread out before her. The lamp burned low as she poured out her thoughts. She was at a crossroads.
Should I go to college or stay and build my ranch?
She wrote about the pull of education, the excitement of new ideas and experiences. College could open doors she'd never even imagined. She could learn things that would help her run a better ranch, maybe even become a veterinarian. The possibilities seemed endless.
But then there's the ranch, the dream I've had for so long. If I leave now, would I ever come back? Would someone else take my place?
Clara wrote about her fears of losing everything she'd worked for, of disappointing her family, of making the wrong choice. As she neared the end of the letter, Clara still didn't have an answer, but writing it all down helped. She realized that either choice would lead to growth, to new experiences, and that maybe the important thing wasn't the choice itself, but how she faced it. The 7th letter was different. Clara wrote it huddled in a small cabin. Outside, a storm raged. She was alone for the first time, tending to a sick horse. It was a test, one she'd set for herself, to prove she could handle the challenges of ranch life.
I described my fears in vivid detail. The loneliness of the empty cabin, the responsibility of caring for the horse, the worry that I might fail.
She wrote about how every creak and groan of the cabin made her jump, how she longed for the comfort of home.
But as the night wore on, something changed. I found strength I didn't know I had. I stayed calm when the horse took a turn for the worse. I problem-solved when supplies ran low. I even began to find beauty in the storm's fury.
By morning, both Clara and the horse had made it through. As she finished the letter, Clara felt different, stronger, more confident. She'd faced her fears and come out the other side. It was a turning point, one she knew she'd look back on for years to come. Clara's 8th letter was full of joy and pride. She wrote it sitting in the loft of the new barn, the one she'd helped build. It had been a community effort, friends, family, and neighbors all pitching in. Clara's dream was becoming reality, one nail at a time.
I described the early mornings and late nights, the aching muscles and blistered hands, but also the laughter and camaraderie. How Emma had shown up every day, even though she was afraid of heights. How my brothers had competed to see who could hammer the fastest.
Clara wrote about the moment the last beam went up, how everyone had cheered, how her father had hugged her, pride shining in his eyes. She described the barn dance they'd held to celebrate, the fiddle music and the stomping feet, the feeling of accomplishment that filled the air.
As I finished the letter, I looked around the new barn. It was more than just a building. It was a symbol of what I could achieve, of the support I had. I felt ready to take on whatever challenges came next.
The 9th letter was bittersweet. Clara wrote it on the eve of her high school graduation. She sat on the porch swing watching the sun set over the ranch. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another.
I reflected on how much I'd grown, from the scared girl writing that first letter to the young woman I am now. I wrote about the lessons I'd learned, about love and loss, about friendship and family, about facing fears and chasing dreams.
She thought about the future too, about college and the ranch. She'd decided to do both, to get an education and then come back to build her dream. It wouldn't be easy, but Clara felt ready for the challenge. She'd faced harder things before.
As I finished the letter, I felt a mix of emotions, excitement for what lay ahead, nostalgia for what I was leaving behind, but most of all, pride in who I'd become, in the journey I'd taken, and in the woman I was still becoming.
Clara's hand shook slightly as she opened the old shoebox. Gray streaked her once dark hair. Laugh lines crinkled around her eyes. She sat in the same ranch house where she'd written that first letter. So much had changed, and yet, so much remained the same.
One by one, I read through the letters. Each one brought back a flood of memories. The hopes and fears of my younger self. The triumphs and heartbreaks. I laughed at some parts, cried at others. It was like having a conversation with my past self.
As she read, Clara marveled at how things had turned out. She'd achieved her dream of running the ranch. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks and hard times, but she'd persevered, just like she'd hoped she would all those years ago.
By the time I finished the last letter, I felt a deep sense of peace, of coming full circle. I'd lived a life true to myself, to the dreams of that young girl writing by lamplight. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Clara sat at her desk, pen in hand. The blank paper before her seemed to stretch endlessly, just like it had all those years ago. But this time, she wasn't writing to herself. She was writing to her granddaughter. She thought carefully about what to say, what wisdom to pass on.
I wanted to share the lessons I'd learned, about the importance of dreams, the strength of family and friendship, the courage it takes to face your fears.
As she wrote, Clara realized something. These letters weren't just about the past. They were about the future, too, about passing on hopes and dreams to the next generation, about leaving a legacy of love and courage.
I finished the letter with a smile. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it in a new shoebox. Maybe someday my granddaughter would write letters of her own, and the cycle would continue. A chain of dreams and memories stretching into the future, just like the endless prairie sky.